Chapter 9 A Long Farewell. Muazzez must have continued to be a quiet baby, but I remember next to nothing about it from those days. Looking back, I find it easier to remember all the strange, unquiet things that happened. I suppose all the memories need only a little shaking up to restore again places and things and people. Certainly, I have little difficulty in delving back into the past. Letters and photographs and latter day conversations have brought all these long dead days before the mind's eye again, in some cases with startling clarity. For instance, I still recall the day my grandmother came to take Faraday away from us. It was high summer, and we played in the garden under the eye of my mother. She was sewing clothes for Marazze, who kicked on a rug, Inja being inside the house working. Faraday's singing voice drifted out from the kitchen, and a great peace lay upon us. It was a cloudless, blue, shining day, and I had a surge of happiness for no reason at all. Never had my home looked prettier, standing there squatly and compactly in its green lawn, and the flower beds a blaze of colour, the house blindingly white where the sun's long fingers touched it, blotched with grey, lacy patterns where the leaves of the vine and the fig tree sheltered it. Recalling that scene now, did an uneasy peace linger in the sky above it, I wonder, making the tranquility stand out all the more sharply by contrast, because of the things to come. The morning remains etched on my mind, one of a series of pictures that will never die whilst I live. My grandmother called towards noon, coming across the grass to us, severe in her high-necked gown. Inja followed her almost immediately with a tray of iced sherbets, cooling, effervescent drinks that tasted of roses. My grandmother sat down in the chaise longue my mother pushed forward for her, unveiled her hot face, and held her hand to us children to be kissed. She was disposed to be gracious, praised the looks of the baby, and gave my mother some entirely unwarranted advice regarding her embroidery, and was altogether so charming that I felt she must want something. For my grandmother was never known to waste her charm on us. She lay back in her chair, talking animatedly and fanning herself with a little ivory fan which she carried everywhere with her. My mother soothed tranquilly, replying to the others' rapid questions in her light, low voice, which seemed to blend so well with the dreaming mood that was upon the house that magic day. My grandmother finished her sherbet, then came to the main point of her visit. Her husband, she said, was giving a very big dinner party that night to some business acquaintances, and she was distracted to know how she would manage, since her cook was in bed sick, and the other servants did not know how to cook any of the elaborate dishes she wished to give the guests. Here she paused, eyeing my mother uneasily, but the latter never betrayed by as much as a flicker of the eyelids what it was she was thinking. She sewed peacefully on, and Mehmed, thoroughly bored by this woman's talk, commenced to pull grasses from which to suck the sap. I hovered uncertainly behind my sister's rug, and my grandmother began to display the faintest trace of irritability. "Well, Sevke," she demanded, in her old bullying voice, all the sweetness gone, "did you hear what I was saying, or have you been dreaming all this time?" "Of course I heard," returned my mother, looking at her steadily, "but I cannot suggest anything. Perhaps your cook will be well enough to get up and prepare everything, and then go back to bed." "Don't be silly," said my grandmother waspishly, the control beginning to go out of her face. "Well, I suppose I shall have to manage something. You could not spare Faraday, could you?" "No," my mother, very gently, and I marvelled at such control and discipline. My grandmother's mouth folded obstinately. "But only for the one night," she begged. "I shall send her back tomorrow morning." My mother did not reply, and my grandmother talked on and on, putting forward all sorts of reasons why she should have Faraday with her. In the end, worn out by such volubility, such unceasing persistence, my mother gave in, but on the condition that Faraday was returned to her house that same evening. Sulkily, my grandmother agreed to this, but she could not afford to be too sulky, since my mother was quite capable of changing her mind. but I think my grandmother had hoped to retain Ferdy until her cook was well again. It mattered nothing to her that Inja and my mother should have to do all the work of the house between them, although if you were to ask my grandmother to do anything, she would be highly indignant and explain to you that she was not a servant. Once she had gained her own way, she hurried off, refusing to stay for luncheon, but stopped on the way to tell Faraday what had been arranged for the afternoon. My mother sighed after her, but made no comment to us. After she herself had gone to the house, Mehmet and I continued to play listlessly, for the sun was very hot. The grass was burning to my hand, the pigeons cooed sleepily, and the whole romantic little scene is so peaceful that it might have been something in a dream. I think too the mood for dreaming was heavy upon me that day, whereas only weighty with prophecy. It is a fact, though, that I remarked to Mehmet, or so my mother in after years assured me, that it would be a pity if all this peaceful life were to be swept away. Mehmet, it is to be assumed, would only have looked at me drowsily, his black eyes uncomprehending. Perhaps it is also to be assumed he would have asked me what I meant. And if he had, I could not have explained. There were no words yet in my vocabulary to express my only half-formed, inarticulate thoughts. The white house, the green lawn, the brilliant flowers, all seemed threatened with annihilation. But where were the words to tell this picture? The dark flash that had for a moment lit my imagination would have been dismissed as a silly, childish fabrication. With Mehmet's drugged eyes holding mine, I might have forgotten the threat that had hung in the bright air, the dark hand that had hovered over me. Little things stand out from that day, all of them unimportant, but having their own sad value in after years. Luncheon was hurried, Ferdy anxious to get away, and Inja was sent to look for bread, for she had a way of insinuating her light body between the crowds in a manner the more solid Ferdy could never emulate. Madame Mouan came across from her garden in the middle of the afternoon, Yasmin and Nuri hotly after her. My mother and she sat idly talking until evening crept into the brilliant sky, and Madame Mouan was begging to stay to dinner. My mother was loath to eat alone these days and welcomed the little diversion her neighbour made. Madame Mouan talked of the war and her husband, but my mother, I thought, seemed anxious to discourage this trend in the conversation. She rarely mentioned my father, even to Mehmet and me. She spoke of him seldom, so that after a while his face would rise before us, the face of a stranger or the face of someone well loved a long time ago, now only vaguely seen or recognized. For long periods at a time we forgot him altogether and could not imagine him again in the house. The squat white house he had bought for his family now seemed a woman's house, and it needed an older imagination than mine to give it back to my father's lounging figure or my uncle's laughter. My grandfather had receded far into the distance. He held no place in the house. He had never known of its existence. Their male figures were dimmer now, and every day they dimmed a little more, waving their ghostly hands in farewell. The day would no doubt come when they would be back with us again, as Inja not infrequently reminded us when we were disobedient. But in the meantime they had lost their authority over us. The sun dropped lower down the sky, and the faintest breeze blew through the long grass. The ladies drew little cashmere shawls about their shoulders, and Inja came to take Moise to bed. Mehmet and I gathered our playthings, then took our guests, Yasmin and Nuri, to wash before dinner. Yasmin splashed cold water across her face, and her reflection glimmered palely in this place of uncertain light. She said, catching sight of herself, "How odd I look." And then there was a doubtful note in her muted voice, as if she did not recognize herself. The dining room was filled with a lucent, tender green light, and all the windows stood open to the empty garden. The snowy table, set with damask and glass and silver, plates of cold food, looked cool and remote, and a dish of black and white grapes making a sombre mark in the centre, like a bruise on a white face, like Yasmin's face so lately seen in the mirror, her eyes like bruises in the pallid ivory of cheeks and nose and forehead. Wine chilled in a cooler, and we children were allowed for this once to sit at a big table. Inja appeared from upstairs. Her day with Moazes finished, and my mother told her not to bother about waiting at the table, but to eat her dinner quickly, then go and collect Ferde. She was so anxious to have the absent Ferde back in the house again that she told Inja the table could be cleared the following morning. Never had I known such a thing permitted before, she being most punctilious in having the house in order before she retired for the night. After Inja had gone, we few were alone in the house, and a great waiting silence seemed to descend upon us, even though wine flowed in the glasses and the ladies' laughter tinkled. Dinner over, we left the salon, leaving the debris on the table, which looked a little vulgar now, as tables always do after a meal has been eaten. My mother made coffee on her little silver spirit lamp, and we sat there in the lengthening dusk that shadowed the salon, a little tired now that the day was over. Presently we would go yawning to bed, and the square white house that held us would creak and grumble and mutter before settling into sleep under a summer sky. Yasmin and Nouri were petulant with tiredness, and Mehmed nodded by himself in a big chair. It was 9 o'clock, and long past bedtime. Madame Mouin gathered her children, and we roused ourselves to walk with them across the garden to the little gate between the houses. We bade them good night, and came back again along the white path glimmering in the dusk, and a little bit of moon was rising in the clear sky. My mother waited for us in the French windows of the dining room. She looked unreal and ghostly standing there, like a figure in a play, so pale she was in her pale clothes. The house by night looked withdrawn and secret, a little frightening in its tall shroud of trees. We went in to my mother, who tightly shuttered the windows, and the dirty littered table looked like a dead house. I helped to fasten doors and windows, then we went up to bed together, a tall golden candle lighting our way. The house seemed incredibly quiet without Inja and Ferde. "How will they get in?" I asked. "Who?" asked my mother, puzzled. "Inja and Ferde," I replied, and she laughed at my anxious face, telling me that they had the front door key, and then Mehmed suddenly said that he wanted Inja and started to cry. My mother put her arm around him, and he sobbed that he was frightened. "There was nothing to be afraid of," said my mother amusedly. The image of Mehmed's fear had imprinted itself on the dark air, and I too began to feel vaguely uneasy. When my mother kissed us good night, I begged her to leave her door open as well as ours. She seemed so reluctant to give in to our fear that Mehmed started to weep again, and her own face began to reflect his terror. I do not know why we were so unaccountably afraid that night. Perhaps a little bit of the future impinged on the consciousness, or perhaps, but I do not know. I only know that having slept contentedly in the dark for years, that night both Mehmed and I were unwilling to see the candle go out of our room and across the landing to my mother's. Before she left us, she stood a few moments at the window, and the tack-tack of Bekja Baba's stick could be heard coming nearer to us. My mother sighed imperceptibly. "Bekja Baba is a great comfort," she said, adding, "I wish he could stay outside this house all night." Then she recollected herself, closed the window a little, and went across to her own room, where Muazzez slept peacefully. I lay sleepless for a long time after she had gone. Street noises drifted in. 2 cats were fighting in the gutter, hissing and spitting at each other with cold, rapacious villainy. The house was very still, the bedroom door a dark cavern, and as the street noises gradually died, I had an odd sense of waiting. I waited, and the house waited, and the empty, staring sky waited, but I do not know for what it was we waited. But I grew tired first and slept, and wild dreams threshed to and fro in my brain. How long I slept I do not know, but I remember waking to a terrible crying from my mother, or was the crying only part of my dreams? Someone was shaking my shoulder, telling me to get up quickly and run, run. My tortured mind could not absorb the one word, run. Still enmeshed in a violent dreaming was my mind. Mehmed whimpered like a little animal, and I caught his hand as he ran blindly past me, swinging myself from the bed, bemused, bewildered, wondering if this horror was still part of a nightmare. My mother was screaming, no control left in her voice. But what was it? She said, I shall never know. Only guess it, perhaps. And the unendurable nightmare persisted. In the dark doorway, clouds of thick, acrid, eye-watering vapour caused me to choke, but my mother, with Muazzez wailing in her arms, inexorably pushed Mehmed and me on before her, down the dark stairs with the hot, thick vapour burning on our throats. Blindly we stumbled, terror-stricken and half-stupid with sleep. A great dark red lick of flame belched upwards to meet us. No, no, screamed Mehmed, hesitating and dragging on my hand to impede progress. Fire, I shouted, suddenly wide awake and comprehending, but my mother pushed me on and I dragged Mehmed after me, his feet slithering reluctantly on the stairs. Run, commanded my mother in an awful voice, a voice to freeze the blood and the marrow, and she forcibly impelled me onward with such force that Mehmed fell on one knee, letting go of my hand. She swooped down on him, frantically tearing him by the shoulder, shouted to me to hold her skirts, and ran like the wind down the narrow pathway through the flames. For a moment that seemed an eternity. She wrenched at the overheated front door, swinging it open for us to fall into the daylight of the street. Oh, to remember that night when the enemy spies set fire to the wooden houses of Istanbul, when they burnt like matchwood under a summer sky. The street was daylight, for all the houses on both sides were lurid blazing mass. The garden door, my mother was saying piously. We had not been able to get to the garden door. The flames in our house had been worse at the back. Did we stand foolishly in the flaming street for one petrified moment? Who knows? Memory has shut down on that, for I can only coherently remember running along the street, clutching my mother tightly, while she sought a way to turn off to reach the waste field that lay at the back of our house, at the bottom of the garden. The street was full of humanity gone momentarily mad. Maidservants, old men in their nightshirts, screaming petrified children, and tumbling down on us great fiery rafters from the derelict deserted houses. One fell on my mother's pat. I heard her give a sort of gasp of horror, moaning, inhuman gasp. Pitter, patter, pitter went our bare running feet on the hard cobblestones, and our breath emerged harshly from our chests, and all the time the fires cracked merrily. Down a dark street this time, with no falling rafters to block our path, frantic men and women at their doors, wondering if the fires would spread to threaten them too. God save us, what a terrible night, said their grotesque faces, but we panted to reach the open fields. Waste ground at last, soft grass under our bleeding feet, and mass hysteria to greet us under the fig trees. Mehmed and I fell on the ground, sore and bleeding, our hearts thumping to bursting point, our thin nightshirts bound with perspiration to our shivering bodies. My mother laid Muazzez across my lap and leaned against a stunted little tree in the posture undeniably touching and desolate. My money, she said over and over again, and all my jewellery. And suddenly, like a mad thing, and indeed I believe the dark, feathery wing of madness touched her brow eternally that night. She darted away from us on her weary, bleeding feet. Anne, Anne, mother, mother, I shouted in a fresh paroxysm of terror. Don't leave us, oh don't leave us. Then I started to cry in a weak sort of way, for I had no energy left to put into crying. But my mother ran unheeding of my crying voice, stumbling a little, falling over, picking herself up to forge ahead. Muazzez lay on my knee, wrapped in a lacy woolen shawl, and I bent over her, wearily trying to hush her whimpering. Mehmed plucked at my sleeve, wanting sympathy too, and I put an arm about him and drew him against my shoulder. We watched the fires and our own house burning with the rest, and our brains were numb, no longer functioning properly. Even fear and tiredness had dropped away to leave us mercifully empty. All about us children were crying and women were wailing, but these were only external things having no power over us. Even the knowledge that my mother had gone back to the burning house could arouse no emotion. revived no terror. We just sat there, Mehmet and I, and the fig tree stretched above us, and now and again Moazes softly whimpered. Before us lay our garden, and farther back was our home that had been our comfort and our childish security. The district Tulumba had arrived, and were trying to find water, and their frantic shouts echoed to us across the gardens. We could see them running from place to place, trying in vain to stem the fires. They had only one pump, but at least 10 houses were burning, and on the other side of the street, which we could not see from here, as many more burned. So they ran and they shouted, throwing ineffectual buckets of water. The fires roared triumphantly. I was watching for my mother to come back, but there was no sign of her for a long, long time. Then I saw her running to us down the garden path, for it was as light as day, and I plainly saw her night-dressed figure and the thin, white, delicate feet running, running, running. She came to us and flung herself down, utterly exhausted, as her hair hung wildly about her face, and in mournful eyes was a glare, a brilliance, which knew nothing of sanity. She looked towards her house, and I looked too, for the last bit of the roof came down into the greedy inferno that waited for it. Our house, like all the others, had blazed up like matchwood, like a piece of paper, and now only its ghostly shell remained to remind us that once we had been happy there. Still, 33 years afterwards, I have only to close my eyes to be back again to that night and see her home burning. It is as clear before me as if it happened only yesterday. A woman came with a crying child and threw it on the grass beside us, then ran off again to God knows where. Surely she did not hope to go through that hell to salvage anything. My mother stared before her with dilated eyes, and my heart turned over in fear. So still and pale she looked. She said very loudly, as if to make sure I quite understood, "Everything is lost. Everything. Do you understand that?" And she fixed me with that hard, brilliant stare, her nostrils quivering. Then suddenly she heeled over in the thick, soft grass, oblivious to the sounds about her ruined, blackened house. How long she lay there, how long we children sat there, I do not know. I think perhaps Mehmed cried himself to sleep, and even Moazes at last gave up her whimpering. Dawn was breaking over the desolate scene, and the fires had died down. Only a pall of thick, black smoke lying over the empty shells of the houses, and there was a chill of early morning in the air. Presently, in all that dead, exhausted place, I discerned my grandmother with Ferdy and Inja coming over the fields, looking to the right and left, as though searching for us. "Grandmother," I called, but my voice was no voice at all, only a thread of sound, a croak that could not disturb the silence. I placed Moazes carefully on the wet, dewy grass and stood up stiffly, walking towards the three who were searching for us. I walked haltingly, for my feet were badly torn and the blood had dried between the toes. The soft dawn air whipped through my thin nightdress like a gale. They saw me and ran crying to me and put their kind arms around me, and my grandmother warmed me with her coat. I stood looking at them as if they were strangers, and in a sense they were strangers, for they came to me out of another life, a gracious, easy, friendly life that might never come again. I told my grandmother my mother was safe, and my brother and my sister too, then led her across the grass to them. Ferdy knelt down beside my mother, taking off her own warm cloak and wrapping it tenderly around her. I saw her force cognac down my mother's throat, and heard her cough and choke a little with its burning rawness. Then she opened her eyes, looked at us for a moment uncomprehendingly. She looked at each of us in turn, then picked Moazes up in her arms. "If you had not taken Ferdy," she said to my grandmother, "something would have been left of my home. I could have saved the only money I had and my jewellery if you had not taken Ferdy." Then her stiff body relaxed and the hardness left her eyes. She looked at me at Mehmed, and at our poor cut feet and smoke-blackened faces, at our quivering, unsteady mouths, and she put out a hand to draw us near. "I still have my two big men," she said, and we fell on her and shed the tears that had been dammed up inside us for too long. Then my grandmother got busy with hot drinks, which she carried in a sort of flannel bag. We were taken to her home. And of all that little group, perhaps, it was I alone who said a long farewell to my burnt home, that had smiled so brilliantly in the sun only yesterday.